Hi everyone, my name is Leanne and today I am bringing you my September wrap up. So these are mini reviews of all of the books that I finished reading in September. And as ever, all of these books will be linked down below in the description if you want to find out more about them. I have, I think, 13 books to talk to you guys about today, so there are quite a few to get through. And I'm really excited to say that I passed my 100 book challenge. I think I mentioned this in my TBR video, but yeah, I set myself a goal of reading 100 books in a year and I have surpassed that now. I set this goal knowing that 100 books was going to be very achievable for me. It was a very no pressure goal, but it's still nice to reach that milestone. So yes, quite a lot of books to get through. I'm going to start with the fiction, then the non-fiction, and then the poetry. And the first book I'm going to talk about is The Testaments by Margaret Atwood. I did consider making a whole video where I spoke about this book, but in doing so, it would kind of defeat the way I feel about this book, in that it was great, it was fantastic, which is a stellar review for any other book, but it feels like there was this weird expectation on this book that it had to be the most amazing book ever written, and it was never going to be that. It's very different in tone from The Handmaid's Tale. It's a lot more commercial, which I really enjoyed. If you don't know anything about The Handmaid's Tale, this is the sequel to it. And The Handmaid's Tale is basically a dystopian book from the 1980s that was all about women very much being controlled and limited by the government, and particular women essentially being used as baby-making machines for wealthy husbands and wives. It's set 15 years after that book, and it follows 3 different women who are in different circumstances in relation to Gilead, which is essentially the dystopian America in which The Handmaid's Tale happens. I found each of the voices in this book really distinctive. I was able to tell who was who really quickly. One thing that was slightly confusing about it was characters being renamed, and that did muddle me up a little bit. I think this book was a really interesting commentary on how women are still treated so poorly in a wide range of societies. This book felt very current and very close to home. I thought all of the characters were treated with complexity and nuance, and this is one of the most gripping, page-turning books I have read in such a long time. When I was reading this book on my commute, I was annoyed when I got to my stop because I didn't want to stop reading this. Some of the plot twists seemed quite predictable, but I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I quite enjoy it when you figure out what's about to happen like a couple of pages before it's revealed. So overall, I really thought this was a fantastic book. And anyone who thinks that Margaret Atwood churned this out to make some money can suck my fucking dick. Next, I have A Portable Shelter by Kirsty Logan. Unfortunately, I think I've decided that Kirsty Logan's writing just isn't for me. I read her novel, The Gracekeepers, which I think I enjoyed that book more than I enjoyed this, but there is some sort of disconnect I feel with her writing. I really enjoyed the framework of this book. This is about a couple who decide that they are only going to tell their unborn child things that are true, but secretly they tell the baby stories when the other one is sleeping. So the sort of framework of this is them introducing those stories and talking to the unborn child, and then you also get the stories as well. It just felt way too much disconnect. There's something that's quite airy-fairy about her writing that I just can't connect with. I just find myself getting very lost in her writing and not really knowing who is who and what's going on. And that is a personal reflection of it. It's not indicative of the quality of this book. I think it just lacked a realism for me. The next book I have to tell you guys about is Don't You Forget About Me by Marlee McFarlane. I've wanted to read one of Marlee McFarlane's books for a really long time, and I think I kind of hyped it up too much in my head. I did really enjoy this book, though there were some things that I didn't quite like about it. This follows our main character, Georgina, who has recently been fired from a dreadful waitressing job. Oh, and she's also just found out that her boyfriend didn't even think they were in a relationship and was cheating on her. So overall, not a great time, but she starts a new job, which she's really excited about. And then she realizes her new boss is someone that she had a romantic encounter with when she was a teenager. But he doesn't seem to remember her at all. It's about her navigating that very confusing situation and getting over her breakup, dealing with her family and her friends, all that kind of typical stuff you get in a Bridget Jones-esque kind of novel. And it's a really funny book. Like, there are so many jokes in this book that I'm like, that is like seriously funny. Like, that could be in a comedy sketch. Unfortunately for me, where this book did fall flat was the romance. I didn't really get being attracted to the like main male lead in this book. I didn't think he was attractive at all, but I guess that's personal preference. But also, I didn't really believe the sexual tension between them either. There's just a lot of bits in this book that I failed to see as realistic. Like, she doesn't think that he remembers her and he's acting like he doesn't remember her. She would say something. I cannot fathom being in that situation and not being like, you do realise we went to school together, right? Still a great book. Like, don't get me wrong, and it is, as I said, rather hilarious at points. And the ex-boyfriend character in this, I think, is someone that we have all encountered. He's a total knobhead. I think I definitely want to read more of Mara McFarlane's books, and I do have another one of her novels already on my shelf, because there was definitely something about her writing style that I really loved, even if I didn't love the entirety of this novel. I have a couple of YA books to talk to you about now. The first of those is Will Grayson by John Green and David Levithan. This is a book that flicks between the perspective of two teenagers who don't seem to have anything in common other than the fact they are both called Will Grayson. Even though the book is told from their perspectives, really the main character in this book is a character who is nicknamed Tiny, somewhat ironically because he is massive. The book is really about Tiny being proud of who he is and coming to terms with who he is, and about him exploring his sexuality. He is gay, as is one of the Will Graysons in this book. One of the Will Graysons he ends up dating, the other Will Grayson is his best friend. That overall kind of plot of the book is fine, but what I found really uncomfortable, but like in a really good way, about this reading experience was the Will Grayson that he ends up dating is kind of like a little emo kid who spends all of his time like talking to internet friends, being like really intense. Oh my god, I was definitely one of those little emo kids that like got way too intense about online friendships and was just so over dramatic about everything. Everything was just the height of emotional turmoil. So like, most people in this book are infuriating, but I was just like, I must have been infuriating because I feel like I was exactly like this kid. I don't think it's the most incredible book ever, but if you were one of those kids, I think reading this will give you a bit of a giggle like it did with me. The next YA book I have is No Big Deal by Bethany Grutter. This is a story of friendship and body positivity with a little bit of tough love romance in there as well. Our main character is a teenager who is beginning to explore romance for the first time. She is really, really body confident, though she does have her moments of insecurity, and I think the way those moments were depicted were really honest. Her relationship with her mother is very difficult because her mother is very focused on the both of them losing weight, whereas our main character isn't really bothered. I think this was a really sex-positive book as well, and it would be really valuable for teenagers to read when they're navigating that for the first time. All the conversations, and the text conversations in particular, that happened between the friends in this book felt really true to life. Yeah, if you are looking for a very good YA read, I would recommend this one. The next book is a classic, and it's one that I actually read last month, but for some reason I forgot to include it in my wrap-up, and that is Deafness and Chloe by Longus. This is a pastoral romance between Deafness and Chloe, who are a goat herd and a shepherdess. It's an ancient Greek story, and they fall in love, but have no clue how love works or what they're supposed to do when they're in love. And there are a lot of like comic elements to this story. So they go and speak to this, essentially like a witch, and ask what love is, and she tells them that they have to sleep together. So they go into a field and they literally sleep side by side. They're just so confused for the entirety of this book. They do eventually like begin to learn about their relationship and themselves, but through a series of very comic situations. This book was really easy to read. I think I approach older books with certainly an amount of trepidation. I feel like I would love to watch like a modern retelling of this. I think that would be really, really fun. Next, I have Elizabeth and Her German Garden by Elizabeth von Arnim. This was written in 1898, and I think the best way to describe it is like a fake autobiography. We follow this character as she describes all the beautiful elements of her garden throughout the year. There are some really rich and gorgeous descriptions of her garden, but they keep being interrupted by political commentary and the author being quite snarky. And it is like all she wants to do is tell you about her beautiful garden and spend time in her beautiful garden and tend to her beautiful garden. But people keep bothering her with their bullshit. So there's a lot in this book about gender inequality. And it does feel a bit like she doesn't even want to talk about this, but she hasn't got a choice other than to give her opinion and be snarky, even though all she wants to do is spend time in her fucking garden. I thought it was really funny. I thought this was really, really funny, and I think it's definitely worth a read if you are into like snarky feminism. I also read Darling by Rachel Edwards, and this is a book that is set just after the result of the EU referendum in the UK. It follows a black woman named Darling as she enters into a relationship with a white man, and it follows how their lives are intertwined in this romance and how Darling in particular is navigating taking care of her own son, but also having her new boyfriend and to-be husband's daughter Lola in her life. Lola is a real piece of work. She's really nasty. She is full of microaggressions towards Darling. Like, she says things like, I'm not racist, but I didn't think my dad was into black women. She just makes really passive-aggressive, snide, nasty comments about and towards her. Darling doesn't like her, but she knows she has to make an effort with her in order to stay in a relationship with her father. Although as the book goes on, we learn more about Lola and realize a lot of the complexities in her life, and it does give you an element of sympathy towards her because there is some really horrible stuff in her life. There's also a lot of stuff in Darling's past that isn't initially revealed to us, and as we go through the book we learn more and more about that. My issue with this book was I felt like there were too many of those little secrets being revealed. It was like as soon as we got to grips with one secret, we were pulled away and pushed towards another secret that was hidden away. When really, I feel like the strength in this book would have been to keep it smaller. Really, where the strength of this book lied was in the author's commentary around a rise in racial prejudice in the UK post-Brexit referendum. I still think it was a fantastic book, but I feel like there were too many balls being juggled in it. By the end, I found myself exhausted of the amount of plot twists there were. I also read a couple of non-fiction books. The first of those is You Do You by Sarah Knight. I'm not going to talk about this one for too long because I just feel like Sarah Knight's self-help books aren't for me. Her books feel very much like pep talks, and this book is all about doing what you want, putting yourself first, giving you tools to be able to do that while still treating the people around you with kindness, but also understanding they don't always need you to be fully kind. But I feel like it was giving me advice that I didn't need. Maybe if you need that advice, then this would be a great book for you. And Sarah Knight definitely has a really conversational tone that I think a lot of people would be into, but it's just not for me, and that's okay. The next non-fiction book I read was No Win Race by Derek A. Bardwell. This is an examination of the intersections between race and sport in Great Britain, although there is also a lot of focus on America, but it's more like how American sport influenced British sport. The author paints an intimate picture of how sport affected his life growing up as a black man in the UK, and also looks how that feeds into wider societal and political aspects of his life. There's a real breadth of sports covered in this book. Obviously, I found myself not enjoying's the wrong word, but getting into the sections on football more because I knew more of the context surrounding who people were. The author looks at a number of key figures in British sport, both men and women, which was really fantastic. One concern I had going into this book was I was hoping it didn't just focus on the men in British sport. It's really thoroughly well researched while also having a personal connection, and if you are into sport and you want to learn more about its wider societal implications, then this is a really fantastic non-fiction book. And now on to the poetry. I read All the Journeys I Never Took by Rebecca Tantony. I enjoyed this poetry collection, and I feel like there's not a lot more to say about it other than that, which is kind of really disappointing. It was good. It spoke a lot about romantic relationships and family relationships, but everything just felt quite surface level to me. There was nothing about the writing that impressed me. It felt unvarnished, unpolished, rather confessional and political, but I don't think it's doing anything or saying anything exciting, which is a shame, really. And that's kind of all I have to say about it. Next, I read Feminine Gospels by Carol Ann Duffy, who's one of my favourite poets of all time. This isn't one of my favourite collections from her, unfortunately, but it's such a high bar that I still really enjoyed it, obviously. If you've read her other collection, The World's Wife, this is kind of similar in intent. So in The World's Wife, Carol Ann Duffy took a number of key figures from mythology and history and retold their stories from their wives' perspective. She's also doing that in this collection with archetypal and biblical figures, but it's a lot more literary and I suppose I would say highbrow than The World's Wife is. It still has her trademark wit and command of language and sound effect, but I did find these poems slightly more impenetrable than I'm used to with her writing. Not impenetrable, they just needed a bit more work on my part. I'm really glad I am gradually working my way through all of Carol Ann Duffy's collections because I just find her such an inspiration as a person and as a poet. The final book I read was a children's poetry collection, and that is Be the Change, Poems to Help You Save the World by Liz Brownlee, Matt Goodfellow and Roger Stevens. This is very much a collection for kids. So I didn't love it, like it was really simplistic. A lot of the poems I found quite twee, which is fine, like it's a collection of children's poetry. And it's all about teaching kids how to save the planet. It does have a focus on sort of environmental stuff, but there are also other things like education, rights and homelessness. And after each poem there is a little bit of information giving the poem context and giving the child an opportunity to learn more about this topic. I think these poems are great prompts for teaching moments, and I guess that really fulfills the intent of this collection. So yeah, not really for me, but I can appreciate the quality of it for its intended audience. So that is it. They are all the books that I read in September. Hopefully October will be just as good of a reading month, if not better. As I mentioned, all of these books will be linked down below if you want to find out more about them. And if you've read any of these books, do leave me a comment down below and let me know what your thoughts were. I would love to have a chat about them down below. Anyways, that's all I'm going to talk about today. I hope you guys are doing well, and I will talk to you in my next video.